Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, schönen Nachmittag nach Österreich. Herzlich willkommen zu unserem Tender-Training-Workshop Irland. 150 Milliarden Euro werden die nächsten 5 Jahre vom irischen Staat beziehungsweise Firmen, die in einer engen Beziehung mit dem Staat stehen, von dem vielleicht sogar besessen werden, ausgeschrieben. Diese Ausgaben werden alleine im Jahr 2020 um 14% steigen. Hier ist Covid ein Treiber von Staatsausgaben und wir sehen dabei sehr große Chancen für österreichische Unternehmen. Mein Name ist Josef Dremmel, ich bin der österreichische Wirtschaftsdelegierte in Irland und betreue hier mit einem Team von 600 österreichische Firmen am Markt und selbstverständlich auch viele Firmen, die neu nach Irland kommen wollen. Nicht nur die stabile Nachfrage und auch die wachsende Nachfrage nach Staatsauftrag, nach Zulieferungen in Irland ist einer der Gründe, warum wir hier einen großen Fokus darauf legen, die Potenziale in Irland zu präsentieren. Der Brexit an sich ist einer der wichtigsten Gründe, warum Irland jetzt für österreichische Unternehmen, die im Bereich der Ausschreibungen Interesse haben, besonders interessant wird. Warum? Zurzeit ist aufgrund dieser engen historischen, aber auch engen wirtschaftlichen Beziehungen das Vereinigte Königreich einer der Hauptlieferanten nach Irland. Und so wie es aussieht und die Übergangsfrist ohne Vertrag ablaufen wird auch das Ausschreibungswesen in Irland, im UK, mit in der Beziehung zwischen UK und der Europäischen Union auf WTO-Regeln zurückfallen, was bedeuten würde, dass britische Anbieter in Irland sowie in der ganzen EU vom Markt gehen würden. Und vor allem bei kleineren Beträgen. Ich habe hier die Beträge aufgeschrieben, bei Aufträgen unter 139.000 Euro, bei Waren und Dienstleistungen und bei Baudienstleistungen unter 5,3 Millionen Euro wird in Zukunft kein britisches Unternehmen mehr als Konkurrenz auftreten. Das ist insbesondere für Irland signifikant, da hier die irischen Käufer, irische Unternehmen, irische staatsnahe Unternehmen schon vor 2 Jahren aufgefordert worden sind vom Office of Government Procurement, wirklich die Struktur der eigenen Beschaffungen zu überprüfen, nachzuschauen, Risiken zu minimieren. Und hier wird jetzt nach und nach wirklich aktiv nach europäischen Lieferanten, speziell im Euroraum, gesucht. Und wir als Außenwirtschaftscenter Dublin sind da sehr aktiv auch und organisieren verschiedene Webinare in diesem Bereich. Aber jetzt zu unserem heutigen Ablauf. Wir haben heute kurz nach meiner Einführung übernimmt Peter Brennan. Das ist ein irischer Spezialist bei Ausschreibungsprozessen. Peter arbeitet hier einerseits mit privaten Unternehmen, um an Ausschreibungen teilzunehmen. Andererseits bereitet er auch für bestimmte öffentliche Behörden Ausschreibungen vor. Also er kennt wirklich beide Seiten und ist hier einfach der perfekte Ansprechpartner. I will switch now to English because Peter will be talking in English later on, and he will start off with his Tender Training Excellence program, which he's delivering in front of quite a big amount of people all over Ireland and also internationally. And then he will get you and show you how to start registering in Ireland for public tendering and where to find the opportunities, the business opportunities that would be the right for you. So now let me hand over to Peter Brennan. Welcome, Peter. I'll turn off shortly my camera and then Peter will continue.
Delighted to be here to explain to you how you can access our very open, competitive tendering market in Ireland. The title of the presentation is the Tender Excellence Program, which we've delivered to 3,000 companies. So hopefully you will benefit from this. I'll take questions as we progress. So if you have any questions, just type them in and I'll do my best to answer them. Okay, I think it's very important before you have a presentation, you understand who is giving you the presentation. I'm a former public servant. I worked at our foreign ministry and with our industry and energy ministry in my early career. I worked with our employer group in Brussels and had a lot of dealings with the Austrian Industry Federation, VOI. We worked very, very closely for over 15 years. And I'm back in Ireland now, about 20 years, running my own consultancy on tendering and procurement. I should add, we work both sides of the tendering equation. I advise companies such as you in bidding into government, but we also have a separate company that advises the government and government agencies as to how to run tender competitions. So we have an awful lot of know-how on both sides of the equation. So hopefully I'll be able to communicate that information to you in the course of the next hour or so. So what I hope to do is to help you identify tender opportunities, to give you a quick overview of the Irish procurement process. There's a lot of guidance information that you need to be aware of. There are some compliance issues, also very important in tendering, as you probably know. There's a lot of information available about opportunities in Ireland, and I'm going to cover as many as I can. And most importantly, I'll answer your questions. The rules are the same here and in Austria. There's no difference really. If you're procuring in Austria, you won't have any problems procuring in Ireland. The rules are practically identical because they're based on the EU directives on procurement. So you'll see a lot of familiar things, such as the European single procurement document, and the threshold arrangements are the same in terms of what is covered by the EU directives. The language is the same. So obviously there's special terms and conditions in Ireland, but they're nothing too particular. And I would very much encourage Austrian companies who have a track record in tendering in Austria, indeed overseas, to consider the Irish market. It is not that difficult to access. You'd be glad to know, I'm not going to take you in the next 6 hours to our Tender Training Excellence program. It's an e-learning program that we have designed. It's in 9 modules. Each module is about 30 minutes. You can access it for free on our website. It covers things like how you win a tender in Ireland, how you manage a bid in Ireland, what the procurement rules are in significant detail. We give you a lot of information sources, and I'll be covering that primarily today. The bid, no bid process, how to submit a tender in Ireland, and there are peculiarities in Ireland about completing tender documents, how to use debriefings, and the Irish public sector is very good at giving constructive and detailed debriefings. There's a separate session on collaborative bidding, in other words, how you might join with an Irish company to jointly tender and what the rules are. And also there's a section on targeting tenders in other jurisdictions, including Northern Ireland and the UK. So our Tender Training Excellence program has been hugely successful. We have it for the last 3 to 4 years. It's free, it's e-learning, so you can read it and look at it wherever you want. And in COVID times, it's easy to do. Very importantly, all companies in Ireland must tender. No exceptions. There are 3,000 public bodies in Ireland, and anyone receiving exchequer funding other than for pay and pensions for goods, services and works, they must tender without exception. I think there's some exceptions in security, but that's a minor issue. Typically, the higher the value of the contract, the more complicated the procedures are. And the EU directives set the rules, which you'll be familiar with. There are published guidelines. Everything is done in Ireland in a very, very transparent way. So you as a supplier can easily access the government's guidelines to see what is and isn't acceptable and how tender competitions are to be run. The system is incredibly transparent. And we have a state company or an agency called the Office of Government Procurement, which effectively runs and sets the rules for procurement in Ireland. It's well-resourced, it's a centre of excellence, and it's a place to go for buyers if they have issues. I think I missed a slide early on, but I'm just going to set the context. I don't see the slides coming up, but the market in Ireland is quite significant. Next year, around 36 billion in goods, services and supplies would be procured, and works, of course. And next year, over the next 5 years, we're talking about 150 billion in potential goods, supplies and works going to procurement. Now, in many other countries in Europe, governments don't like contracts going outside their jurisdiction, but not so in Ireland. Around 10, maybe 11% of the goods and works in particular that we contract or put out to tender go to non-Irish companies. So if 150 billion over 5 years, minimum 15 billion of that will go to non-Irish companies. The reason is we don't manufacture an awful lot of goods that we procure. And also we have an open traded economy. So the rules here are designed to encourage non-Irish companies to bid into Ireland, and a lot do so very, very successfully. There's another dimension, which is Brexit, because the UK companies and Northern Ireland companies have been very successful in bidding into Ireland, and it remains to be seen as to whether they will be as successful post-Brexit. Now, it depends on whether the WTO rules are being used, and if they are going to be used, it may inhibit or prevent some UK companies tendering into Ireland to the same extent they have been for the last 20, 30, 40 years. If you want to be engaged in tendering in Ireland, you basically need to spend a little bit of time reading about the procurement rules of the road, to understand the policies. And we have a textbook which goes with our program, which I'll reference later on. It explains in very simple language how you procure in Ireland, what the rules are, what the compliance requirements are, and the do's and don'ts of tendering. You should absolutely target and prioritize. Each major public authority will have a list of potential tenders for the following 2 to 3 years. So it's relatively easy using Joseph and Advantage Austria, to talk to Irish public buyers who have tenders in the pipeline. Obviously, there's no point in bidding for something that's already been tendered, but most public bodies here would have a long pipeline of projects. The procedures are very similar, as I said earlier, to what you'd be experiencing in Austria. Everything is tendered here through the English language. That's probably the main difference. If you want to win a tender in Ireland, do your homework. If you see a tender that's appearing and you're seeing it only for the first time and you have 30 days to respond to it, you probably are going to struggle to put a competitive tender bid together. So we always recommend to companies who are looking to tender into Ireland that they should invest time in researching the market in advance and to understand why certain tenders are coming out and what their value is. So that is absolutely essential if you're coming into the market in Ireland. You may need to find bid partners. Collaborative bidding in Ireland is commonplace. Irish companies collaborate with each other and they collaborate with companies outside Ireland. Insofar as today is concerned, it is critical, it's absolutely essential that you're registered correctly on the government's portal, which is called e-tenders. And it's through this website that all communication in relation to tenders goes. To receive tenders by push notification, you only get them if you're registered on e-tenders. So the second part of my presentation will be to show you how to register on e-tenders and to do so correctly. That's why you tender. 150 billion euros worth of export opportunities. Of that, I would say conservatively, 15 billion will go outside the Irish jurisdiction, which is a lot. There are 3,000 public bodies in Ireland, probably the same in Austria, most countries. They're split in different ways, the same as in Austria. You've central government ministries or departments, you've local and regional bodies, we've 33 in Ireland. We've health services, hospitals, public and private. We've a primary, secondary and third educational sector. We've state companies, some of them are commercial, some of them are regulatory, some of them are non-commercial. We've An Garda Síochána, which is our police force. We've a small army, and we've a very large voluntary and charity sector. Now, if the voluntary and charity sector gets state funding, which they do, they are obliged to procure and to tender. So a lot of these bodies procure significant amounts of money, particularly in the healthcare area. And also we have an awful lot of local and community groups that are always tendering. Now, you may well say, oh, we don't know where to go to find out who's who, but there's a very, very good resource available to you, which I highly recommend. This is a yearbook or a diary. It's published in Ireland by what's called the Institute of Public Administration, the IPA. And it gives you the names, the addresses, the positions of every key decision maker in every single public sector body in Ireland. So if you want to find out from a local authority who the director of housing is, because you're selling housing products, you'll be able to find out using this directory. And it's also, I gather from next year, will be published electronically via an app. So if you want to get a copy of this book, you can Google IPA directory. It costs about 70 euros, but it is absolutely essential reading for people like myself who need the email, phone, and web contacts of every single public servant in Ireland and all the decision makers. So as you can see, the system is incredibly transparent. Quite a few of you on the call are in the construction sector. So I'm going to spend a bit of time telling you about Ireland's works contracts. We have a long-term strategy for public capital works. It's called Project Ireland or Project Ireland 2040. The government announced this a year or so ago with an initial budget of 116 billion euros over 10 years. Now, that budget will be increased because the entire program is under review at the moment. But what the program does, which is of particular interest to those of you who are in the work sector, it gives you a very clear description as to what the government has in mind. So if you open the section on sustainable mobility, it'll tell you all about public sector transport, or light rail, or heavy rail, buses, electric vehicle charging, green infrastructure, everything that the government is planning to do at a fine level of detail. The same thing with research or with carbon or energy efficiency. There will be a significant level of explanation as to what is planned. Now, these programs have been built up over the last 2 to 3 years. Some of them are already in procurement, but the vast majority of them are going into procurement. So you want to do your pre-market research. This document, Project Ireland, that I've shown you on this slide, is absolutely essential reading. It's very well laid out, so it's very easy sector by sector to find out exactly what you're looking for. Not only that, but the government department responsible has what's called a project tracker. Now this might be a bit difficult to read, but it lists every single potential project in Ireland in the next 5 to 10 years and explains its status. In other words, where it's at, where it's going, who is the sponsoring public body, or what the projected budget is. So you'll be able very easily, just Google Project Ireland 2040 Project Tracker, and you'll get access to this document. It's updated every quarter, and it's a fantastic resource for companies like yourselves who are trying to find out how to get into the Irish market or to focus on particular projects. Now, one of you, I gather, is in the area of green environment, of green initiatives and greenways and cycle lanes and things like that. The government yesterday announced a programme worth 65 million euros in approved government monies for that type of investment. Now, all of that is publicly accessible. The state companies and local authorities who are going to be procuring that will have been identified. So it makes the point that in Ireland, it is very transparent when government is going to publish. So getting information on these projects is very easy through the project tracker in particular. If you want to focus on one particular area, you go to this particular part of the website and it'll identify in the different regions of Ireland exactly what is planned at micro level. And on the right side, all the relevant policy documents that are relevant to procuring are set out. You can get hyperlinks when you get the slide deck to these various sectors. We have a national spatial plan in Ireland, which is supported by Project Ireland. So in other words, the investment opportunities are linked to an all of Ireland strategic planning framework. So the documentation is very transparent. It's all been approved, apart from individual projects, which have to go through a particular process that I'll mention now in a minute. In Ireland, one thing is unusual compared to other countries. We publish every single tender opportunity valued at over 25,000 euros. In some countries in Europe, they don't publish tenders unless they're over the EU threshold. But very low value contracts here are published, over 25,000. They're advertised EU-wide, but you must be registered on e-tenders to see these particular tenders. If you're registered on Tenders Electronic Daily, which is the European portal for tenders, you will get access to the higher value tenders only. But below the EU threshold, believe you me, there are significant numbers of tenders that are available, which companies typically outside Ireland don't see. And again, we're very transparent. The figure in the UK, I think, above which they publish is something in the region of, I think, 30 to 40,000 sterling. So we have a very low threshold beyond which there is total transparency for public tendering. I mentioned very briefly our Office of Government Procurement. It is the regulator. They set the rules. They don't have a statutory regulatory authority, but they do set the rules. They produce guidance documents. They produce policy statements, and you do need to be up to date in relation to what the Office of Government Procurement is doing. We have a centralized system of procurement in Ireland in the sense that the Office of Government Procurement is a centre of excellence. It's over 200 public servants working in it. We have a delegated model in the sense that public bodies are then told to do their own procurement, but the central resource is available to them. In particular, they manage framework agreements. There are about 130 framework agreements in Ireland managed by the Office of Government Procurement for goods and services only, not for works contracts. So for a very significant number of opportunities in goods and services, there are already frameworks in place, which means in practical terms, if you're not one of those companies on a panel in a framework, you will not get access to procurement opportunities for the products and goods and services covered by the frameworks until the framework expires. And the framework typically lasts 4 years. There's also a help desk. So if you're running into trouble with a particular tender, you can contact their tender advisory service, and they're very helpful in answering queries and questions in the event of sort of contract dispute or tender dispute. This is their website. It's very easy to navigate. There's a buyer zone, which is here for the public sector buyers. You can get all the documents that they publish, all their circulars, all their news, everything. It's absolutely, totally open book. So there is a very significant amount of information available in terms of background documents on this website. This website does not manage the tendering process. This is just basically policy guidance and background documentation. The tender, we have a separate website for managing tenders. I'll come to that now in a minute. I mentioned there are guidebooks and rules. The document here on the right is probably the only document I recommend that you actually read if you want to get involved in tendering in Ireland. It sets out in the clearest possible manner how and why you go about tendering. The rules are crystal clear, and the rules have been set for the public sector bodies. So if you can read the rules of the public sector bodies, you can understand what they're looking for, why they're looking for it, and in what way and what manner. So this particular guide is very, very well written, and is absolutely essential reading. A lot of you are involved with works. In Ireland, like in most other countries, we have a completely separate set of rules for works contracts, and the rules get more complicated the higher the value of the contract. We have what's called a construction works management framework. There's a web link or a hyperlink to that website. The documentation is very complicated, no more complicated than it is in other countries, I might add. So you may need some guidance and support, and we're very happy to provide that to you if you're bidding using these documents. A new feature in Ireland, only in the last maybe 2 years or so, is that all significant large-scale contracts for current expenditure and for capital expenditure have to be appraised using the public spending code. This is a mandatory requirement. So if, for example, there was a sewage project or an energy efficiency project over 20 million, it will not be tendered unless there is a public spending code business case submitted and the sponsoring minister approves it. And indeed, in some cases, the government will be required to agree to the publication of a tender. So there's a lot of rigor that goes into pre-research from the public sector's perspective before a tender is published. And what this basically means is they will look at the various options for the delivery of a service or a good. They will decide on the risk profile. They will decide on the appropriate procurement procedure. They will probably determine what is a best value for money price. Your bids come in, and the best value for money price corresponds with your bid. It'll probably be approved. So it's an extra sense of discipline on the public sector. The policy, again, is transparent because the government believes that these business cases should be published. So if you get a tender for a very large works contract, typically the business case will be published. So you will see the different scenarios that have been agreed before the tender was released. Some sections may be redacted, but in general, you will get access to some very valuable information, insights, strategy, the why of what the client is looking for, what the public sector is looking for. For example, in Ireland, in Dublin, there's a huge project to build a metro type infrastructure through the city out to our airport. And that's already been the subject of a business case, which has been published. So it's very easy to see what are the approximate budget parameters of a major piece of capital works. This is a screenshot of the website for the construction procurement reform. So you can see all the different documents, how they work. Today is not the day to take you through them all. We'll be here till 7 o'clock if I did that. But for those of you who want to bid for construction works in Ireland, you absolutely should become familiar with this website and the documents and to become familiar with them. They're used by everyone, and it's compulsory for public bodies who are procuring capital works to use the documents and the model forms that are set out in this particular website. And I mentioned the public spending code. I'll leave you there for reference purposes. Unlike in other European countries, there has been a trend in Ireland to centralize procurement in frameworks, and what you'd be familiar with frameworks. For example, we frameworks for practically everything. You want a framework, you are a supplier in print, or for professional services, or for facilities management, or travel, or ICT, you would probably, as a public sector body, have a framework. So it is a requirement for public sector bodies, if they have a requirement, for example, for an auditor or for somebody providing IT equipment, that they use the framework, the Office of Government's Procurement framework in the first instance. Now, most of you probably haven't tendered to be in a framework, so you're automatically excluded for the duration of the framework, which are typically 4 years. The good news is that a lot of these frameworks, which were procured initially 3, 4, 5 years ago, are now being re-advertised. So you will have the opportunity, if you're being alert, to potentially bid in to these Irish frameworks. They're usually very high value. For example, in the last few days, a new framework was published for waste management to a contract value of 20 million euros in 13 lots spread all over Ireland. So these frameworks will pop up from time to time, and they are for high value contracts, and collaborative bidding is absolutely accepted. So typically what happens is you're accepted onto the framework, and if there is a requirement, say in this case for waste management services, you and everyone on the panel, there could be 4, 5, 6 panelists, and only those 4, 5, or 6 will be asked to submit a tender. That tender will not be published, it's only sent to the shortlisted successful panelists. So it's a closed shop in a way, but it does work, and it does work very efficiently. So if you want to find out whether what you're selling is in a framework or not, go onto the website I've indicated, and you can Google search whether your particular supply, service, or goods is actually covered by a framework. And if you're unsure, you can ask myself or Joseph to find out for you. Another feature in Ireland is that procurement now is done by category. This is commonplace in Europe. We're only doing this now for the last 4 to 5 years. So you'll see all the categories here. Every single subcategory is a person in the Office of Government Procurement. If you're into cleaning equipment or fitting or clothes or waste management, there is a government official who does nothing but procure that particular service or good 24/7. So there are different categories which are procured, they're managed centrally. So it means that there's a huge amount of know-how and skill and procurement excellence when it comes to procuring, for example, sports equipment, because there's know-how there and experience, because all the sports equipment tenders go to one person who knows the market, which basically means it's much more efficient and achieves very significant economies of scale. Also, we've got category management in health, education, defence, and local government. So everything is basically broken down into different categories, which is commonplace in most countries. So you won't be too unfamiliar with this, I'd imagine. This is the government's homepage for tendering, and I'm going to go into this in significant detail after the first part of the presentation. It's called eTenders, and you have to be registered on eTenders to get a tender notification. So typically, I'm going to show you in a few minutes how to register. So you register your product or your service or what you want to bid works, and every time there's a tender in that area, you will automatically get a push notification on the day the tender is published. So you don't need to search this website, you get an automatic notification, but you do have to tender correctly. And I too have to register correctly, and I'll show you how to do that now in a few moments. Typically, this is what you see in the morning when you wake up, when you're looking for your tenders. You will see all the published tenders, who's published them, what the value might be. So it's very easy to check and to be, as I said, and I keep on saying, the system in Ireland is incredibly transparent. So there's very little is purchased in Ireland that doesn't go into the e-tenders system. Green public procurement is beginning to become important in Ireland. I know Austrian companies will be very familiar with green public procurement and sustainability criteria, but we're only starting here in Ireland in relation to green public procurement. The vast majority of Irish suppliers aren't familiar with this, and this will give Austrian companies a competitive advantage because you're used to supplying sustainable products or products that have energy efficiency standards. The government has decided that green public procurement will become mandatory over the next couple of years. Now, when that will happen exactly, I'm not so sure, but there is a commitment to make green public procurement compulsory in large-scale tenders, so the ones over the EU threshold, for example. So there's going to be quite an amount of activity in this space, and we're already seeing many contracting authorities, including sustainability practices and standards and codes of practice as minimum requirements in some of their tenders. The vast majority of tenders in Ireland use the open procedure, which you'll be familiar with, which is a single stage procedure. You submit your document, it's assessed as to, from a pre-qualification perspective. Your bid is then marked out of 100, and the highest scoring bid wins the tender. We also use the restricted procedure to a lesser extent in Ireland, and also some negotiated procedures. But there is in Ireland, which is commonplace, I think, in Austria, a dynamic purchasing system. This is now being used far more frequently for more regular supplies and low-risk supplies of goods and services, and indeed works. And here is a good example of a very recent live dynamic purchasing system. It's by one of our energy agencies. It's currently live. It's looking for applicants who are in the area of energy and climate action consultancy and works. So if you can do energy efficiency audits, you can do supply energy efficiency products, solar PV, you can do works, you can register or apply to become a company under this dynamic purchasing system. The way it works is that once you're registered, once there's a requirement in the lot that you bid for, you will automatically get an invitation, an opportunity to tender for that particular lot. And the advantage of a dynamic purchasing system is, unlike most other tenders, there's no closing date. So you can join the dynamic purchasing system at any stage. If you don't want to do it today, you can do it next month or the month after. It's open. The only requirement is you must meet certain minimum pre-qualification requirements. But once they are met, you will then get all the tendering opportunities as a panel member on whatever lot you bid for. And a lot of public bodies in Ireland are beginning to use dynamic purchasing systems, which is very friendly for small firms in particular, because typically for most tenders, as you know, there's a deadline, a submission deadline. For the dynamic purchasing system, that doesn't happen. It's open-ended. I should also mention briefly how bids are scored in Ireland. I haven't scored any bids in Austria, so I'm not so familiar. But we have in all our tender documents a very transparent scoring methodology. So typically you won't get 70 marks or 70% in a section unless it complies with the published scoring methodology. So there's a very clear way of getting marks in Ireland. Typically, for quality, the scoring methodology applies as you see it. For price, typically it is the lowest costed price gets the maximum marks available. So if there was a tender with 100% and 35 for price, the company that gives the lowest price gets 35%, and the remaining part of the bid. So understanding how bids are scored is really, really, really important. I evaluate bids most weeks. I'm in the middle of evaluating 12 submissions at the moment. And I can tell you the winners and losers will either win or lose on the split of 1 percentage point. So typically you score more marks by responding in more detail. if you're lazy in not submitting material, you will lose marks. So in Ireland, the rule is respond comprehensively to the questions that you're asked by each award criteria. And the more you write, the more technically you can be communicating, the more compelling your arguments, the higher the probability is you'll score more marks. This is the last slide of the first part of the presentation. As I said, this is our book, which if you want to go into any of the issues I've mentioned in more detail, all the information is there. I see a question. Are all tenders on e-tenders, i.e. also published on TED Europe? Yes is the answer, over the EU threshold. But under the EU threshold, they will not be published on TED. They'll only be published on e-tenders, hence the importance of registering on e-tenders. So there is a requirement for every major Irish tender that is in excess of the EU threshold. They automatically are published on tenders electronic data. Nothing's coming up on the questions and answers. Okay, if that's the case, and as I present, I'm now going to do the second part of the presentation. But if you have questions on particular opportunities or anything I've said, put them up on the board here, and I'll do my best to respond. In every country in Europe, there is a system, in Ireland's case, called e-tenders, where you have to register. If you're not registered, you don't get access to the tender documents. And I'm going to explain step by step how you do this. It won't take too long. And what I've done is I've done screenshots of all the relevant parts of the e-tenders website, and I'll explain to you how you go from one part of the registration process to the next. And as this particular presentation is being recorded by video, you can recap at your leisure. So if you want to register for Irish tenders, just Google search e-tenders, and you click the supplier company registration. So this gets you into the registration section of e-tenders. This is what will appear. Get registered. So you put your company name in, your type of business activity, your VAT number if you have it. Are you an SME? Are you not? Your address, basic information. The Dunn's code over here is the Dun & Bradstreet code. It's not compulsory to complete it, but if you can, do so. So again, this is the first page that you'll see. Then you press save and you move on to the next page. Complete this form. What's your point of contact? Phone number, give the international code. Save, move on. It's very intuitive, very straightforward, very easy to read. You then have to fill out certain sections, and you will note some of these are compulsory. My recommendation is that you complete them all. For example, the company role or company area, your email, contact details, everything like this. It's nothing unusual, nothing too burdensome. Then you save. You then have your username. You put your password in. You click add email. So that basically means that you will get push emails or automatic alerts. And you can change your password at any stage. Now, e-tenders has an unusual feature in the sense that it won't allow you multiple access points. So it's looking for one person per company. So don't try and put 3 or 4 people in. Register once, and the system will accept your registration. There are, I think, 49,000 companies registered on e-tenders, of which about 12,000 are non-Irish. So it's a busy website, I can vouch. Then you click the login link. You'll be getting a login link. Once you're registered, you automatically will get a link to the email that you have provided, and then you start. This is the login link. You just click in below, as you can see, and you go back into the website, having registered, having done your initial registration. Like most websites, you have to accept the terms and conditions. Click accept, don't read them. They're fairly standard. I've never come across any problems. So click your terms and conditions, and your data. It includes a data protection statement, I might add. Now, you'll be prompted when you see this, which is your personal page, you'll be prompted that your company information needs to be complemented or needs to be filled in detail. So we go back into your company profile, and this is hugely important for a reason I'll explain in a minute. So company profile is fairly straightforward. You describe what you do here. This box is the most important box of the entire process. Why? Because a public sector buyer who's looking perhaps to send a lower value tender to 3 or 4 companies can access this particular information and may well decide that you, as the energy efficiency consultant, are the person they want to talk to. So explain in detail with 500 characters what your business does. Your website is already provided, so there's no need to give a website, but give a very, very clear description as to what your business is. Don't just say, we are a company that provides energy efficiency. Try and provide the type of services. If you have ISO or other standards, or you're selling products, name them. So be as complete as possible in putting out the general information about your business. Then save, always save. Never move on to the next section until you save. Here again, you'll be looking for a little bit more information. Turnover, it is not compulsory, but again, it gives the public sector people looking at this website an indication as to what your size is. Are you a member of a trade association? Do you have a website? That's my website. What is your preferred value of contract? If you're a very big company, obviously it'd be a bigger amount, but if you're a smaller company, it might be smaller. If you have ISO certificates or environmental certificates, just tick them. And as you can see, you're building up a profile on the eTenders website, which is exactly what the public bodies want. And save and move on. So you get a page. This is what I put up in my own website. It's my company name, my address, our organization number, our email, mobile number, phone number, etc. Type. And once you're happy with this, your company is registered correctly. Now you can edit it at any stage. Is there anything too difficult to date in this? It is no. It is very straightforward. It will take you probably 5, maybe 10 minutes to complete registration on eTenders. It is not that difficult. And one of the reasons it's so straightforward is you do not need to upload supporting documents. It's basically everything that you want to put into the tender submission form, you do it yourself. Very important that you go down to business alerts. This is one of the critical features of eTenders. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to get an eTender alert on a contract over 25,000 euros in Ireland, you click the box here, business alerts, and you automatically, every morning, will get tender notifications for the sector that you're interested in. How do you do this? Well, you click start using business alerts. Okay, start using business alerts here. You click that button, and then you're asked to complete or identify what's called Common Procurement Vocabulary, CPV codes. For every single product, good or service in Europe, there's an EU-approved 8-digit number that represents that sector. So you have to identify what the sector or what the codes are for you. And you do that by doing basically a Google search, which is facilitated on the website. So there's a category tree. You type in here, energy efficiency. And then the common procurement vocabulary for energy efficiency services, goods, or works will appear, and you select the ones that are relevant to your business. And they are automatically put on the system. And for every single tender in that energy efficiency, be it goods, services, or works, every single tender over 25,000 that's published in Ireland, you will automatically get a copy, push notification for free. All of this is for free. There's no charge for any of this. For example, in my area, I do procurement. So these are the categories that I've ticked. We do procurement training, consultancy services, etc. And you can add more common procurement vocabulary codes. You can pick as many as you like. And I always err on the side of picking more than you normally would. And you pick the bigger categories and micro categories as well. It's up to you to decide what you want to do. It may take a little bit of time fishing around to find the categories that best represent your business. But once they're done, click and upload and you're away. You can see here there are codes for practically everything. And when your company fits into one of these categories, your trick is to find out which one. Here's more codes as well, a lot of them. So then when you clicked your codes, your CPV codes, you get this statement, business alerts are on, and you have a free subscription for business alerts for, in this case, to 2,999. That's a long-term subscription. So every morning you will get your business alerts over your cup of coffee and your croissant. So what happens then? The e-tenders will send you an automatic email saying, welcome, your registration has been accepted. Your password and username are set up. And you can see the EU email address. So you automatically are told that your application has been successfully registered on e-tenders. If you don't get that response notification, it means that it hasn't been. But 99.9% of cases, if you do exactly what I told you, you will get an automatic notification from e-tenders that you're on their system. So in the morning, this is what an e-tenders alert looks like. You get the list of tenders that have been published in your category. So you might only get one, you might get 20, and it depends. Some days you mightn't get any. You'll only get an alert when there are tender opportunities on that day. So what you typically do, in this case, you tick, in this particular case, RTE, which is actually Radio Telefís Éireann, which is the Irish television station. So they published a tender. So you want to see what's in the RTE tender. So you click on the hyperlink. This form appears, you click the accept button, and all the documents appear down here. You'll be able to see all the documents. And this basically means from this point onwards, you've access to all the tender documents, you've expressed an interest in the tender, at any time there's a message or a clarification, you will automatically get a notification the same as everyone else. As I said right at the outset, it is incredibly transparent. There's no point talking directly to a contracting authority. They are trained not to talk to you. All correspondence goes through e-tenders. So you can open the documents in this case. There's a pre-qualification questionnaire. There's terms and conditions and different documents for different types of opportunities. So it is very easy to access the documentation, and it gives you the documents will give you an instruction as to how to submit a tender. So in each case, every single tender document will explain what the contracting authority is looking for. There will be published selection criteria and typically published award criteria in most tenders, unless there's a pre-qualification stage. So it's very easy to get the documentation once you're registered. That concludes the second part of my presentation, which is telling you how to get into e-tenders and how automatically to get tender push notifications for the tender sectors that you're interested in. Plenty of time now for questions and answers. Have we any questions? And I'll try and do the answers. Well, if you have any queries or questions, Joseph here in Advantage Austria in Dublin is available to take inquiries. I will support him in whatever way possible. I would finish by saying that unlike most other European countries, it is very easy to tender into Ireland. The UK probably not tendering as much post-Brexit. There are plenty of opportunities for Austrian companies, particularly in the construction area, which is the budget for construction in Ireland is increasing dramatically and is at record high levels. So again, I hope that you can participate in the tendering process in Ireland. Yes, I see a question here. We've participated in some tenders in Ireland. Takes a long time to decide, 12 months. Is there a maximum time frame for decisions? The short answer is no. There's nothing in the EU regulations or directives about taking decisions. Best practice is that the evaluation is completed very quickly after the tender submission deadline. I'm working on a tender competition with the client at the moment where we have 12 submissions over 16 lots. It's a very complex evaluation, but it's 4 weeks, I think, since the tender submission deadline, and we hope to complete the evaluation tomorrow. So if it's a simple tender requirement with only one lot, you probably get a decision within weeks, but the larger value, larger scale tenders for works in particular can take a bit longer, as they do in other countries. So if you are waiting for more than 3 or 4 weeks, I would always send a clarification letter or an email through eTenders to say, dear local authority, what is the current status about the evaluation? And the government guidelines are the evaluation should take place as quickly as possible after the tender submission date. Doesn't happen all the time, but the vast, vast majority of contracting authorities that we work with are very diligent and try to get decisions taken and communicated very quickly. There are exceptions, and it's a pity you've had 1 or 2, but generally speaking, Irish public bodies are pretty good at getting tender decisions out, say within 2 to 3 months. Can Austrian companies partner with Irish companies? Absolutely. Very simple to do. We have what we call a teaming agreement, which I can share with Joseph. So basically, which sets out who does what in delivering the service. And it is very much encouraged. Our standard conditions, the very first opening paragraphs of any Irish tender, you will see the government encourages the participation of SMEs and encourages SMEs to collaborate. So they know that innovation can result if Irish companies collaborate, particularly with technology partners outside the jurisdiction. So in Ireland, there's plenty of examples of very good practical collaboration, and it is encouraged here, not just by the letter, in practice. And I've seen plenty of examples of really, really good JVs, particularly in technology, where maybe Irish companies don't have the same skills or track record, or where you have, as an Austrian company, a particular energy efficiency product, but you can't get it into the Irish market because you need an Irish contractor or a maintenance company. And those sort of projects are quite welcomed, and there's no reason as to why they won't be considered very favorably. Great to have the opportunity of talking to you. I've been to Austria and Vienna many, many times, and I've worked very closely with your industry federation over many years. So any way I can help, I'm available to yourselves and to Advantage Austria. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'll give you over to Joseph.
So, thank you, Peter. Vielen Dank. Das war ein höchst interessanter Vortrag. Peter ist hier wesentlich schneller durchgekommen, als wir das ursprünglich geplant hatten. Wenn Sie noch Fragen haben sollten, schicken Sie die uns an dublin@wko.at. Hat vielleicht noch jemand Fragen an mich? Peter hat gerade vorhin erwähnt, dass es auch encouraged, also dass die irischen Ausschreibungen auch Partnerschaften von Unternehmen einfach anregen, solche Partnerschaften zu machen. Wenn Sie irische Partner suchen, das ist unser Kerngeschäft hier im Außenwirtschaftscenter in Dublin. Wir helfen Ihnen da gerne, Partner zu suchen, Firmen vorzustellen. Da schicken Sie einfach eine kurze E-Mail an uns. Unsere Kontaktdaten, E-Mail-Adresse finden Sie auf diesem Slide. Und wenn Sie sonst noch Fragen haben sollten, wie gesagt, rufen Sie an, schicken Sie eine E-Mail. Trotz Corona sind wir aktiv. Das Team arbeitet zum größten Teil aus dem Homeoffice. Was für Sie vielleicht noch interessant sein könnte, wir planen am 19.11. ein Webinar zur Montage Firmengründung in Irland, wo wir auch Themen wie Brexit, Logistik behandeln werden. Anfang Dezember machen wir dann, und das passt eben zu unserem Thema jetzt dazu, Regierungsausschreibungen, Zulieferchancen im Bereich der Straßeninfrastruktur. Da hat Irland einiges vor allem im Bereich der Fußgängerinfrastruktur und der Fahrradinfrastruktur. Irland hat seit Juli eine grüne Regierungsbeteiligung und die Grüne Partei hat sich diese Regierungsbeteiligung sehr teuer abkaufen lassen. Also es werden hier die nächsten Jahre pro Jahr 360 Millionen Euro in die Fußgänger- und Fahrradinfrastruktur investiert werden, in das ganze Land. Also da wird einiges passieren. Entschuldigung, öffentlicher Verkehr ist auch dabei. Also da wird einiges kommen die nächsten Jahre. Und Mitte Jänner konnten wir den Leiter der Ausschreibungsabteilung von Irish Water und Gas Island gewinnen, der zu Projekten im Bereich einfach Wasser- und Gasinfrastruktur sprechen wird. Auch hier bedarf einfach die Supplier, die Lieferantenbasis zu erweitern, zu schauen, welche Anbieter gibt es also in Europa, wieder im Euroraum, um hier einfach die Lieferung von Ersatzteilen etc. einfach auf sichere Beine zu stellen und nicht unter Umständen dann von Zöllen oder Lieferproblemen etc. Im UK behindert zu werden. Dann sage ich noch vielen Dank. Ich wünsche Ihnen noch einen schönen Tag nach Österreich und ich hoffe, Sie bei einem unserer nächsten Veranstaltungen begrüßen zu dürfen.